What if everything you know about Victorian America, corsets, prim posture, starched collars, and stiff decorum is a complete illusion? Beneath the refined surface of polite society lay a hidden world, one where power, desire, and rebellion converged behind closed doors, not in the bedrooms of operatives, but in parlors, salons, and even medical offices. This isn't the frilly side of history. This is the secret sexual history of elite women who dared to defy the strict codes of their time and paid for it in silence. Before we dive deeper into this untold chapter of American history, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Only subscribers see this side of history raw, personal, unfiltered. Let's begin with the First Lady at the White House, who everyone thought was tragic, but never quite understood. Mary Todd Lincoln. Publicly, she was labeled unstable after her husband's assassination. Privately, rumors swirled that she had engaged in forbidden love affairs to gain attention, power, or simply escape grief. Political rivals whispered about midnight meetings with trusted ambassadors and clandestine letters mailed from hotels under pseudonyms. Whether true or myth, these stories were enough to destroy her public reputation, casting her as a woman whose emotional independence made men uncomfortable. Then drift west to San Francisco in the 1880s, where the glamorous ballroom Mary, a name taken by society pages, lived a double life. By day, she presided over debutante balls, bedecked in silk and diamonds. By night, she strode into red light districts, wearing the same society regalia, and entered a brothel as a patron, not a client. Her private diaries, now in a museum archive, speak of intellectual exchanges with high-class sex workers, whispered conspiracies about suffrage, and illicit poetry exchanged under candlelight. She didn't seek profit. She sought liberation, expression, and a life beyond the rigid gender norms imposed on her. Traveling east, enter the waiting rooms of the pioneering Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, America's first female doctor. Her discreet clinic in New York became a refuge for women suffering from what Victorian medical books euphemistically called female hysteria or nerve strain. The treatments, blue pills, erotic literature, and a trusting environment to explore their own suppressed sexual feelings. Many of those women later became social hostesses in their own right, women who hosted reading circles with banned French novels and poems. Their husbands believed it was medical, but in their private circles, it was liberation cloaked in diagnosis. Meanwhile, in rural New England, women quietly exchanged pages from banned literary works from Europe, Voltaire, de Sade, and controversial French artists, and met in small, secret liberation circles. In the kitchen parlors of progressive suffragette families, they read aloud passages exploring themes of women's autonomy, reproductive knowledge, and unconventional relationships, subjects strictly forbidden in public discourse. Letters discovered in a state library mention midnight meetings in town barns, hidden beneath quilts, where these gatherings were lit by oil lamps and guarded by trusted allies, women who risked arrest rather than remain silent. In the South, much of this activity intersected with the little-known world of female-operated brothels and midwife practices disguised as women's clinics. They sold herbal abortifacients, rudimentary birth control, and even erotic illustrations depicting female pleasure. Elite housewives discreetly sent their husbands to these establishments and sometimes attended themselves after dark, under separate entrances. These madam physicians became medical and personal confidants, erasing the divide between professional and personal intimacy. Perhaps one of the most tragic examples is Edith Wilson, wife of President Woodrow Wilson. After Woodrow's stroke in 1919, Edith unofficially guided the country's executive decisions. But many historians suggest she also lived emotionally and perhaps physically isolated from the public. Rumors circulated that she sought solace in private correspondence with younger staffers and doctors, possibly even relationships outside the strict bounds of the presidency. In Pennsylvania archives, letters remain unsigned. They speak of longing, isolation, and a woman whose private life became a quiet rebellion against political confinement. These women, rich, educated, powerful, found themselves choked by Victorian morality. They used poetry, medicine, late-night salons, and even social rebellion as tools for intimacy. Their stories were never recorded in school books because they threatened the narrative of America as a righteous, chaste nation. Instead, these fragments are found in suppressed letters, burned diaries, hushed gossip, and faded yellowed pages in historical archives. Their emancipation was private. Candlelit reading rooms in Boston attics, whispered poetry on the Hudson, salon gatherings in Charleston parlors, and discreet drug counseling in Manhattan offices. Their legacy, a secret map of sexual rebellion woven into the elite social circles of Victorian America. If this peek into the hidden lives of America's Victorian women sparked your curiosity, stay tuned, because up next we'll go deeper. You'll meet specific women: a Montana suffragette executed for love letters, a Boston heiress institutionalized for erotic literature addiction, and a proper Virginia hostess who finally embraced lesbian love, but was erased by her family. We'll also explore how these private rebellions influenced the suffrage movement and shifted public notions of female sexuality in the early 20th century. Imagine a Boston library, 1892. In the back, beyond the marble busts of Emerson and Hawthorne, a young woman sat hidden among stacks of French poetry, her breath quickening as she flipped through verses that spoke of women's longing, touch, and feverish dreams. Her name was Clara Standish Winthrop, a descendant of the famous Puritan lineage. Her family was pure Americana, old money, old religion, old shame. When her mother discovered Clara's private journal, filled with passionate letters to a female art teacher, she was locked away in a sanitarium for correction. Clara never left. Her writings remained in a sealed trunk until a great-niece found them during a property sale in 1981. In Montana, far from the rigid etiquette of the East, Martha Bell Lewis made her rebellion public, then paid for it with her life. A suffragette and amateur playwright, Martha began publishing feminist erotica in the local newspaper under a pseudonym. The stories weren't pornographic in today's terms. They were revolutionary. Women undressing not just clothes, but social roles, exploring their own bodies, speaking of their desires without apology. When her identity was uncovered, the town branded her immoral. A mob stormed her cabin and burned her manuscripts. Some say her death days later was suicide. Others claim she was hanged, and it was covered up.
Subscribe to
Farther
my
south in
channel.
Virginia, Eleanor Tyne lived a quieter life, but no less courageous. A plantation heiress turned abolitionist, Eleanor remained unmarried well into her 40s, baffling her family. After her death, a cache of letters was found in her hope chest, written to a woman named Ruth. The letters didn't just speak of love, they hinted at a shared bed, travels by train under assumed names, even a desire to raise a child together. The letters were burned by her estate executor, but one survived, passed quietly to a museum archivist who preserved it. Its closing line read simply, "Where there is no name for us, we shall invent one." These women were not anomalies. Across America, during the Victorian era, a slow, quiet revolution simmered under the surface. Publicly, they donned corsets and hosted teas. Privately, they experimented with contraception made from crushed seeds and sap, read translated Indian love poems, and gathered in small circles where they read Sappho's poetry in secret. They worshipped Aphrodite in a time that only allowed for Madonna. Many used their privilege not just to survive, but to shield others. A woman like Beatrice, how a wealthy widow in New York, disguised her townhouse as a boarding school for girls. In truth, it was a refuge for women escaping abusive marriages. There, women could write, work, and even fall in love, often with each other. They changed their names, wore men's trousers indoors, and discussed things like sex and freedom over brandy and strawberries. The city dismissed it as eccentric, but it was a blueprint for modern feminism. Medicine was another battleground. Doctors continued to prescribe so-called pelvic massage to women diagnosed with hysteria without openly acknowledging what the procedure involved. But some women, like Dr. Rebecca Stone, began to challenge the deception. In private, she gave talks to small groups of women about female health, reproductive choices, and emotional intimacy between women, all presented as hygienic instruction. Her lectures eventually attracted the attention of moral reformers who sought to revoke her medical license. She was forced to relocate and change her name, but her students quietly passed on her teachings in their own homes. Victorian America wasn't simply repressed, it was duplicitous. The same society that passed anti-obscenity laws was quietly consuming erotic literature imported from Paris and Rome. The same churches that preached abstinence before marriage were sending daughters to Europe to be educated by liberal tutors who taught more than grammar. Perhaps the most haunting truth is how many women disappeared into silence. Not because they died, but because their stories were wiped clean, diaries burned, letters shredded, photos retouched to remove a second woman. One historian, combing through court records in Ohio, discovered dozens of annulled marriages for reasons not specified, and in most, the wives had taken female lodgers within weeks of filing. The paper trail ends there, but the pattern speaks loudly. What remains of these women are whispers, initials in margins, footnotes in legal documents, scratched out names in censuses. The absence itself tells the story. They lived, they loved, they suffered, they resisted, and history buried them under lace and myth. But now, we remember. And that concludes our journey into the secret lives of America's Victorian women. If you found yourself drawn into their hidden world, share this story, leave a comment, and subscribe for more untold histories. There's so much the textbooks left out, and every story we uncover brings the past just a little bit closer.